In 1919, Germany signed a piece of paper, and a nation began to die. Not with bombs, not with bullets, but with words. The Treaty of Versailles ended the First World War. For much of the world, it was peace. For Germany, it felt like humiliation. It lost territory, its military, its colonies, its pride. Then came Article 231, the War Guilt Clause. Germany accepted responsibility for the war. And then came the reparations, so crushing that the economy buckled beneath them. Hyperinflation followed. People pushed wheelbarrows of cash just to buy bread. Families who had spent generations building a life lost everything almost overnight. A nation that had once seen itself as one of Europe's great powers was now wounded, humiliated, desperate for an explanation. Wounded people always are. Pain demands a story, someone to explain why, someone to tell us who is to blame. And into that desperation, a voice arrived, not with evidence, not with truth, but with a narrative, a lens that took a nation's genuine suffering and pointed it toward an enemy. Germany listened, Germany believed. Within 2 decades, Europe was burning, 6 million Jewish people murdered, tens of millions more dead across a world at war, cities reduced to rubble, lives beyond counting. It all began not with a battle, not with an army, not with a bomb, but with a narrative, a lens. An entire nation chose to believe. But this story did not begin in Germany. It began thousands of years earlier, in a wilderness, with 12 men, and a 40-day journey into a land they had been promised. Before we return to those 12 men, we need to sit with a question, because what happened in Germany is disturbing, not simply because of the violence or the scale, but because it was ordinary people, teachers, farmers, doctors, fathers, mothers. People who loved their children, who went to church, who had neighbors, friends, and ordinary lives. Yet an entire nation followed a narrative into catastrophe. How does that happen? We want to believe Germany was unique, a tragedy that belonged to another century, something that could never happen again. But then came Rwanda. 100 days, 800,000 people murdered. Not soldiers killing soldiers, neighbors killing neighbors, persuaded by a narrative carried over the radio, a voice that taught them to see human beings as cockroaches. And they believed it. This isn't ancient history. It happened within living memory. And it didn't begin with machetes. It began with a microphone, with a lens. So the question isn't whether narratives are powerful. History has already answered that. The real question is this: who teaches us how to see? That question was first asked thousands of years ago, long before Germany, long before Rwanda. A man named Moses sent 12 leaders into Canaan, not to change the land, but to tell the nation how to see it. And what those 12 men brought back changed everything. Israel stood at the edge of Canaan, the land God had promised them. Moses chose 12 men, not ordinary men, leaders, one from each tribe, respected, trusted, the kind of men whose words carried weight. For 40 days, they explored the land. They saw its valleys, its fortified cities, its people. They even cut down a cluster of grapes so large, it took 2 men to carry it between them. Then they returned, and this is where everything changed. Because all 12 agreed on the facts. The land was exactly as God had promised, flowing with milk and honey, rich beyond anything they had known in Egypt. All 12 agreed. Then came one word, but. One word that erased everything that came before it. The people are powerful. The cities are fortified. We saw giants. We cannot attack them. They are stronger than we are. Then came the sentence that condemned an entire generation. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Read that again. They didn't begin with the giants, they began with themselves. The greatest problem wasn't outside them, it was inside them. A leader who sees himself as a grasshopper will eventually lead others to think like grasshoppers. The people believed them. They wept through the night. They wanted a new leader, one who would take them back to Egypt, back to slavery, rather than forward into promise. Two men stood against the crowd, Joshua and Caleb. We should go up and take possession of the land. We can certainly do it. Same land, same giants, same evidence, different lens. Joshua and Caleb never denied the giants. They simply refused to let fear interpret them. The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid. The people's response, they talked about stoning them. Because truth is rarely welcomed. When fear already has the crowd, the nation chose the 10. God's response was immediate. This generation will not enter the land I promised. For 40 years, they wandered, not because the giants defeated them, not because God abandoned them, but because they chose the lens of fear over the lens of faith. 3,000 years have passed since 12 men returned from Canaan. Human nature hasn't changed, because the mechanism hasn't changed. A wounded people, a compelling narrative, a nation that accepts it, a future shaped by it. History keeps telling the same story. Sometimes, the lens destroys. Germany, a nation stripped of dignity, searching for someone to blame. One narrative, one leader. Millions followed. The result was the darkest chapter of the 20th century. Then Rwanda. Not tanks, not missiles. A radio station. A voice teaching neighbors to fear neighbors. Teaching ordinary people to see human beings as less than human. The lens changed, the violence followed. But history also remembers another kind of leader. In 1940, Britain stood alone. France had fallen. Europe was collapsing. The facts were terrifying. Winston Churchill never denied them. He simply refused to surrender to them. We shall fight on the beaches. The bombs still fell. The losses were still real. But the nation saw itself differently. And because it did, it endured. Martin Luther King Jr. inherited segregation. He did not deny it. Nelson Mandela inherited bitterness. He did not deny it. Neither man changed reality overnight. They changed the lens through which people understood it. Different century, different continent, same principle. The most influential leaders are not always those who change the facts. They are the ones who change what the facts mean. Fear has always claimed to be realism. It points to real giants, real wounds, real danger. That is why it sounds convincing. The question has never been whether the giants exist. The question is, who is teaching you how to see them? So how do we know? How does an ordinary person tell the difference between the 10 spies and Joshua and Caleb, between Churchill and the voice that told Germany its suffering was someone else's fault? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. In the beginning, they often sound alike. Both speak with confidence. Both point to real problems. Both claim to see reality clearly. So how do we choose? Scripture gives us a way, not a political test, not an ideological one, a human one. First, truth. Does the voice tell the whole story, or only the part that serves its purpose? The 10 spies described the giants accurately, but they left out the promise. A half-truth can be just as dangerous as a lie. Then, evidence. Not just, what are the facts, but what is this voice teaching me to do with the facts? Facts filtered through fear become a prison. Facts filtered through faith become courage. Then, character. Who is speaking? Not how famous they are, not how persuasive they sound. Who have they become? What kind of life has shaped their voice? Character always speaks louder than confidence. Then motive. What does this voice gain if I believe it? Every narrative serves someone's interest. Follow the benefit, and you'll often discover the truth. Finally, look at the fruit, not the promises, the outcome. The 10 spies produced despair. Joshua and Caleb produced courage. Germany followed one voice and found destruction. South Africa followed another and found reconciliation. Jesus said, "You will know them by their fruit." History agrees. Truth, evidence, character, motive, fruit. Not volume, not popularity, not certainty. Because the majority believed the 10 spies and the majority died in the wilderness, the loudest voice is not always the truest one. We've spent this essay talking about nations, but before we finish, we need to make it personal. Because the 10 spies weren't only describing Canaan, they were describing themselves. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Notice what they didn't say. They didn't say we were grasshoppers. They said we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Before the nation believed that story, they believed it themselves. The most dangerous lens isn't the one others place over your eyes, it's the one you place over your own. That private narrative became a public one. The public narrative became a national one, and the national one shaped an entire generation. So perhaps the most important question isn't who are the 10 spies in your world? Perhaps it's this: what story are you telling yourself? Because some of us have stood at the edge of our own Canaan and turned back. Not because the opportunity wasn't real, not because God withdrew his promise, but because we believed we weren't enough. I'm not qualified. I'm too old. I'm too broken. I'm too late. The giants are too big. I'm just a grasshopper. And without realizing it, we've started walking back toward Egypt. Not because slavery looked attractive, but because fear looked sensible. Some of those voices came from failure. Some came from disappointment. Some came from childhood. Some came from people whose words you've carried for decades, until they've become your own. But Caleb had the same facts, the same giants, the same land. The difference wasn't what he saw. It was the lens through which he saw it. Scripture says he had a different spirit, not different evidence, a different spirit. And that different spirit led him into a promise an entire generation never experienced. So before we close, ask yourself one question. What lens have I been using to interpret my own life? Is it truth? Or is it simply the loudest voice I've ever believed? Because sometimes the 10 spies aren't standing around you. They're speaking inside you. And perhaps the voice you've needed all along is the one who has never called you a grasshopper. We began in Germany, a wounded nation, searching for someone to explain its pain. It found a voice and believed it. History has repeated that pattern ever since. A wounded people, a compelling narrative, a lens embraced, a future shaped. But history remembers another kind of leader: Joshua, Churchill, Martin Luther King Jr., Mandela. Different centuries, different worlds, the same choice. Not between facts and fiction, but between fear and faith, because the facts were never the real battle. The battle was always over the lens through which those facts would be seen. Joshua and Caleb saw the same giants, walked the same roads, carried the same grapes, but they refused to surrender their imagination to fear. And because they chose a different lens, they inherited a different future, not only for themselves, for the generation that followed them. Leadership has always been like that. A leader never walks alone. Others inherit the world they choose to see. And perhaps that's why this story still matters. Every day, voices compete for your attention. Some magnify your fears, some magnify your failures, some convince you that your giants are greater than your God. Others remind you that the promise is greater than the obstacle. So test the voices. Look beyond their confidence. Examine their truth, their character, their motives, their fruit. Then choose carefully, because every life, every family, every church, every nation eventually becomes the story it believes. And somewhere between the voice of the 10 and the voice of the 2, every one of us must decide, which lens will we choose? The Constant North. Subscribe, follow, and share for more.